I was thrown out by my parents because my perfect brother hated me. Now karma's turned the tables. The day they cast me out wasn't stormy or dramatic. It was actually perfect weather, sunny with a gentle breeze, the kind of day where good things are supposed to happen. Alexandra, you need to understand. My father, Richard Montgomery, sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, not bothering to look me in the eyes. This company has been in our family for 3 generations. We need someone reliable at the helm. I gripped the armrests of my chair until my knuckles turned white. And I'm not reliable? I've worked here since I was 16. I have an MBA. I increased our tech division's profits by 28% last quarter. Numbers on paper, he dismissed with a wave. Daniel has the intangibles, the presence, the leadership quality. My brother Daniel stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the city skyline. He didn't smirk or gloat openly. He was too calculated for that. Instead, he offered a look of practiced sympathy that never reached his eyes. "Alex, be reasonable," Daniel said smoothly. "You're brilliant with ideas, but you're too emotional for this position. The board respects me." "They respect you because you're Dad's carbon copy," I shot back. "And because you're a man." My mother, sitting primly on the leather sofa, clicked her tongue. "There you go again, Alexandra. Always making everything about gender. This isn't about you being a woman. It's about Daniel being better suited." I turned to her, hoping for even a glimpse of maternal support. There was none. Eleanor Montgomery had always been the perfect corporate wife, poised and blindly devoted to preserving the family legacy through her son. "I deserved a chance," I said quietly. "One real chance to prove myself." My father sighed, finally looking up from the documents that officially named Daniel as the new CEO. "You've had chances, Alexandra. That marketing initiative last year? A disaster. The Asian expansion you pushed for? We're still recovering from those losses." "Those weren't failures." I stood up, my voice rising. "The marketing initiative was sabotaged from within, and the Asian expansion would have paid off if you hadn't pulled the plug 6 months too early." Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder that felt like an anvil. "Maybe this is for the best, Alex. You can find something that suits your particular talents." I shrugged his hand away. "Don't patronize me. Alexandra, enough drama." My father's voice turned cold. "Daniel will be taking over as CEO effective immediately. You're welcome to stay on in marketing, but frankly, given your attitude, perhaps a clean break would be better for everyone." "A clean break," I repeated numbly. "You're firing me? I'm suggesting you pursue opportunities elsewhere. Your shares will remain in trust, managed by the family office. In other words, I get no say in how they're used." My mother stood, smoothing her skirt. "Darling, don't be difficult. This arrangement is quite generous. Many people would be thrilled to have a trust fund and the freedom to find their passion." I laughed hollowly. My passion was right here, building this company. "But you never saw that, did you?" "What we saw," Daniel interjected, "was someone who constantly questioned every decision, who couldn't follow the established Montgomery way of doing business." "The Montgomery way," I spat. "You mean outdated, risk-averse, and painfully traditional?" My father's fist came down hard. "That's enough. Those traditions built this company. Those traditions put food on your table and that expensive education on your resume." I took a deep breath, suddenly feeling calm. There was clarity in finally accepting what I'd always known. I was never going to be good enough for them. "You know what? You're right." I reached for my bag. "A clean break is exactly what I need." "Alexandra," my mother began, her tone softening slightly, "don't pretend you're sad to see me go. We all know this has been the plan since Daniel graduated business school." I walked to the door, then paused. "You know what the worst part is? I actually believed that merit mattered in this family, that if I worked hard enough, I could earn my place." I looked directly at Daniel. "But the place was never open, was it? It was reserved from birth." Daniel looked uncomfortable, but my father remained unmoved. "If you're quite finished with the theatrics, I have a board meeting to prepare for." Those dismissive words were the last straw. I turned back and delivered the words I never thought I'd have the courage to say. One day, you'll regret this decision. Not because you love me, I've given up on that fantasy, but because Daniel will run this company into the ground, and when he does, remember this moment. My mother gasped. My father's face turned crimson. But it was Daniel's expression that would stay with me, a flash of pure hatred, quickly masked by confidence. In that instant, I saw the truth. Daniel didn't just want me gone from the company. He wanted me gone from their lives. Stay out of business matters you no longer have any part in, my father warned. The Montgomery name still means something in this city. Don't make me ensure you can never work in this industry again. Goodbye, I said simply and walked out. As I passed through the corridors for the last time, employees averted their eyes. I was already a pariah, the failed Montgomery heir who couldn't cut it. Outside, that beautiful sunny day continued, oblivious to my personal apocalypse. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the gleaming Montgomery building and made a silent vow. I would never beg them for anything. I would build something of my own, something so successful they couldn't ignore it. And when their precious golden boy inevitably failed, I would watch their empire crumble, just as they had watched me walk away with nothing but my determination. I deleted my family from my contacts, hailed a cab to my friend Mia's apartment, and didn't look back. For the first time, my future would be entirely of my own making. 3 years passed like a fever dream. The first 6 months after leaving Montgomery Industries were the hardest. My savings dwindled quickly in a city as expensive as New York. Mia's couch, though offered with kindness, grew uncomfortable after the second month. Pride kept me from touching the trust fund. It wasn't just money from my parents, it was a leash they could yank whenever they wanted. I needed to be completely free. I found work at a struggling tech startup called Nexus Innovation. The pay was abysmal, but the founder, Marcus Chun, recognized my Montgomery Industries experience as valuable. We can't offer you anything close to what you're worth, Marcus had said during my interview, his honesty refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. But what we can offer is freedom. Your ideas won't die in committee here. I started as a business development manager, a title that meant I did everything from sales calls to coffee runs. But Marcus kept his promise about freedom. When I pitched a new approach to their floundering cloud security product, he actually listened. "This is brilliant, Alex," he said after reviewing my proposal. "But we can't afford to implement it." "Let me find the funding," I countered. "Give me 2 weeks." I spent those 2 weeks networking at every tech event in the city, finally connecting with Sofia Vega, a venture capitalist known for taking risks on unconventional ideas. "Montgomery," she mused during our meeting. "Any relation to Montgomery Industries?" "No," I lied smoothly. "Just a coincidence." Whether she believed me or not, Sofia invested $2 million in Nexus, specifically for my security platform concept. The project succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, putting Nexus on the map and earning me a promotion to Chief Strategy Officer. That first success became a pattern. I developed an instinct for spotting market gaps and creating solutions that filled them perfectly. Each victory built my confidence and expanded my network. I soaked up knowledge like a sponge, learning from Marcus's technical brilliance and Sofia's financial savvy. By year 2, I was ready for my own venture. I left Nexus with Marcus's blessing and a small stake in the now thriving company. I launched Ascendant Technologies with a focus on adaptive AI solutions for enterprise security, a field Montgomery Industries had dismissed as too speculative when I proposed exploring it. "You're taking an enormous risk," Sofia warned when I pitched her for seed funding. "The market isn't ready." "The market doesn't know it's ready yet," I replied. "That's our advantage." She invested $5 million. I worked 18-hour days, building my team carefully, selecting people based on talent and potential rather than pedigree or connections. No one at Ascendant knew about my Montgomery background. I was just Alex, the driven founder who expected excellence but led by example. The breakthrough came when we developed SHIELD, an AI security protocol that could adapt to emerging threats in real time. Our first major client, a Fortune 500 bank, reported a 70% reduction in security breaches within 3 months of implementation. Word spread, and suddenly everyone wanted SHIELD. I avoided business publications and industry events where I might encounter my family. But eventually, success made anonymity impossible. When Forbes wanted to profile Ascendant for their Companies to Watch issue, I couldn't refuse the exposure it would bring my team. The morning the article was published, my phone exploded with congratulatory messages, and one from a number I didn't recognize. "Alex, it's Raj Patel. Remember me?" Raj had been a mid-level executive at Montgomery Industries, one of the few who had openly supported my ideas. "I saw the Forbes piece," he continued. "I'm not surprised you've done well, but I thought you'd want to know what's happening here." My heart raced. "I'm listening." "It's not good. Daniel's made some catastrophic decisions." "That European merger you opposed?" He pushed it through. "It's bleeding money, and he's alienated half the board with his arrogance." I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, but also a surprising pang for the company my grandfather had built. "Why tell me this, Raj?" "Because I respect what you've built on your own. And because rumors are flying that Montgomery Industries is looking for outside investment. Thought you might find that interesting." After hanging up, I researched Montgomery Industries' recent performance. The stock had plummeted 40% in 18 months. Their flagship products were losing market share to more innovative competitors, including Ascendant. I allowed myself one moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Then I got back to work. My revenge wasn't Daniel's failure, it was my success. By the third year, Ascendant's valuation hit $1.2 billion after a successful Series C funding round. We expanded into international markets, opened offices in London and Singapore, and doubled our R&D budget. I had built something remarkable, something entirely mine. Meanwhile, Montgomery Industries continued its decline. Industry analysts blamed leadership issues and failure to innovate, the very things I had warned about. The stock fell another 15%. I was in our Tokyo office when my assistant interrupted a meeting. "I'm sorry, Ms. Montgomery, but there's an Eleanor Montgomery insisting on speaking with you. She says she's your mother." The room went silent. None of my team knew about my family connection. I had carefully maintained that separation. "Take a message," I replied calmly. But curiosity got the better of me. Later that night, I listened to her voicemail. "Alexandra, this is your mother. We need to talk. It's about the company. Things are difficult. Please call me back." Her voice lacked its usual imperial confidence. She sounded desperate. I deleted the message without returning the call. They had thrown me away when I was inconvenient. Now they wanted me back because they needed me. But I had learned patience. If Montgomery Industries was truly failing, this wouldn't be their last attempt to reach me. I would wait, let them sweat, let them wonder if I'd even take their call. After all, I had all the power now. The financial news networks couldn't get enough of the Montgomery Industries saga. I watched from my penthouse office as CNBC ran yet another segment on what they were calling the Montgomery meltdown. Once considered untouchable in the tech sector, Montgomery Industries posted its fourth consecutive quarterly loss today, the anchor reported. Sources close to the board say CEO Daniel Montgomery faces mounting pressure to step down. I switched off the screen and turned to face the Manhattan skyline. In the 5 years since I'd left, I'd never once reached out to my family. But I'd kept tabs on their company's decline with clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly predictable experiment. After my mother's desperate call 6 months ago, the situation had accelerated dramatically. Daniel had doubled down on his failing strategies, making increasingly erratic decisions. The European merger had become a money pit. Their core products were outdated. Innovation had stagnated. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Montgomery, Tiago from R&D needs your sign-off on the Chimera project parameters." "Tell him I'll be down in 20 minutes, I replied, then paused. "Also, Isabella, has there been any additional contact from Montgomery Industries?"
"No, ma'am."
"Just the quarterly competitive analysis report you requested." I smiled. The report showed Montgomery Industries had lost 62% of its market value since Daniel took over. Their credit rating had been downgraded twice. Industry insiders whispered about bankruptcy looming on the horizon. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had always criticized my risky ideas, yet his safe approach was destroying everything our grandfather had built. Later that afternoon, I was reviewing acquisition proposals when Isabella buzzed again. "Ms. Montgomery, there are 2 people in the lobby insisting on seeing you. Richard and Eleanor Montgomery." My blood froze. After 5 years of silence, they had come to me. "How do they look?" I asked, surprising myself with a question. Isabella, always perceptive, understood immediately. Disheveled. Tired. Mr. Montgomery's tie is crooked, and Mrs. Montgomery's hands are shaking. They don't look like the photos I've seen in business magazines. "Send them up," I decided. "And Isabella, clear my schedule for the next hour." I arranged myself behind my desk, deliberately mirroring my father's posture from that fateful day. When they entered, I barely recognized them. My father, once imposing and immaculate, looked gaunt. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair had gone completely white. My mother had aged a decade in 5 years, her carefully maintained appearance now showing cracks, chipped nail polish, smudged mascara, a designer bag that was 2 seasons out of date. "Alexandra," my father began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "It's Alex now." I corrected him coolly. "Please sit." They perched awkwardly on my visitors' chairs, Italian leather that cost more than what most people earned in a month. The power dynamic was unmistakable. "You've done well for yourself," my mother observed, glancing around at my office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art pieces.
I have.
"But you didn't come here to admire my success. What do you want?" My father cleared his throat. "The company is in trouble." "I'm aware," I replied. "Industry analysis suggests Montgomery Industries will be insolvent within 8 months without significant intervention." My precise knowledge of their situation clearly unsettled them. "Daniel has made some unfortunate decisions," my father continued, choosing his words carefully. I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet office. "Is that what we're calling it? Unfortunate? He's run our grandfather's legacy into the ground. The company that took 3 generations to build has lost most of its value in 5 years under his leadership." "We know," my mother said quietly. "That's why we're here." "To gloat?" my father asked, a flash of his old temper showing through. "Is that what you want? To hear us say you were right? I don't need you to tell me I was right. The market has already confirmed that." I leaned forward. "What I want to know is why you're sitting in my office after 5 years of radio silence." My mother reached for her husband's hand. "We need your help, Alexandra, Alex. The banks are calling in loans. Investors are pulling out. The board is in revolt. And Daniel?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "He refuses to acknowledge reality," my father admitted. "He blames market conditions, corporate sabotage, everything but his own decisions." "Like father, like son," I remarked pointedly. My father flinched but didn't argue. His desperation was palpable. "It's still the family business," my mother pleaded. "You owe us this." The statement was so absurd, I actually laughed. "I owe you? You threw me out. You threatened to blacklist me in the industry. You chose Daniel over me at every turn. I owe you nothing." "Then why monitor our company so closely?" my father challenged. I stood and walked to the window. "Professional curiosity. Nothing more." "I don't believe you," he said. "Montgomery blood runs in your veins, whether you acknowledge it or not. You can't want to see your grandfather's company destroyed." I turned to face them. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Investment," my father said bluntly. "And your expertise. The board would welcome you as a senior advisor." "Under Daniel's leadership?" I asked incredulously. My parents exchanged glances. "For now," my mother said carefully. "A transition period would be necessary." I studied them both, these 2 proud people reduced to begging. They didn't even have the decency to admit they wanted me to replace Daniel. They were still protecting him, even as he destroyed everything. I'll consider it, I said finally, but I'll need full financial disclosure and board meeting minutes for the past 3 years. I want to see exactly how bad things are. Relief washed over their faces prematurely. However, I continued, my help will come with conditions. Non-negotiable ones. What conditions? My father asked warily. I smiled. I'll have my team prepare a proposal, but I should warn you, you won't like my terms. As they left, visibly shaken but clinging to hope, I knew the next stage of my plan was about to begin. They had no idea what was coming. Daniel's incompetence had opened the door, and I was about to walk right through it. The empire that had cast me aside was crumbling, and from its ashes, I would build something entirely new. 2 weeks after my parents' desperate visit, I arranged our follow-up meeting at Ascendant's headquarters. This time, however, I insisted that Daniel join them. If I was going to witness their humiliation, I wanted the full set. I chose the executive boardroom for maximum effect, 60 stories above Manhattan, with panoramic views that emphasized just how far I'd risen. My team had prepared a comprehensive analysis of Montgomery Industries' catastrophic state, displayed on the wall-mounted screens in merciless detail: plummeting stock charts, debt-to-income ratios, fleeing investors, and declining market share. When they arrived, Daniel looked even worse than my parents had described. His expensive suit couldn't hide his physical deterioration: the bloodshot eyes, the nervous twitch in his left hand, the way he kept running his fingers through his thinning hair. Success had once made him glow. Failure had made him diminish. "Thank you for coming," I greeted them with professional detachment. "Please have a seat." My father and mother sat immediately. Daniel remained standing, glaring at me with undisguised hostility. "I don't see why I need to be here," he growled. "This is a waste of time." "Sit down, Daniel," my father ordered, his voice sharp with anxiety. "For once in your life, just listen." The command, so similar to ones that had once been directed at me, made me suppress a smile. Daniel reluctantly took a seat, his posture radiating defiance. "I've reviewed your company's situation," I began, deliberately using your rather than our to distance myself. "It's worse than you've admitted publicly. You're 3 months from insolvency, not 8. You've lost your competitive edge in every market segment. Your employees are jumping ship. 17 executives have left in the past quarter alone. We're aware of the challenges," my mother said softly. "Challenges?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's a rather mild term for catastrophic failure, wouldn't you say?" Daniel slammed his palm on the table. "If you brought us here to gloat, I brought you here to decide whether to save Montgomery Industries or let it collapse," I interrupted coolly. "Your choice." My father leaned forward. "What are your terms?" I tapped my tablet and a new presentation appeared on the screens. Ascendant Technologies will purchase a controlling interest in Montgomery Industries. We'll inject enough capital to stabilize operations and restructure debt. In return, we require several non-negotiable conditions. "Such as?" my father asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Daniel steps down as CEO immediately. I assume full control of operations. The Montgomery name remains, but the company becomes a subsidiary of Ascendant. All executive decisions require my approval." Daniel shot to his feet. "This is absurd. You want to steal our company. Your company?" I laughed. "Daniel, you've already destroyed it. I'm offering to salvage what's left." "And if we refuse?" my mother asked quietly. "Then Montgomery Industries files for bankruptcy within the quarter. Your family legacy disappears. Your personal fortunes, which I know are heavily tied to company stock, vanish. Your social standing, your connections, your comfortable lifestyle, all gone." I shrugged. "Your choice." Daniel turned to our parents. "You can't seriously be considering this. She's blackmailing us." "It's not blackmail," I corrected him. "It's business. Something you should have learned." My father rubbed his temples. "We need time to discuss." "You have 24 hours, I cut in. "After that, my offer expires. And given your company's reputation, I doubt you'll find another investor willing to touch it." My mother looked at me with genuine curiosity. You've become quite ruthless, Alexandra. I learned from experts, I replied evenly. As they prepared to leave, Daniel lingered behind. When we were alone, his facade cracked. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? He hissed. Plotting your revenge while I struggled to keep the company afloat. Struggled? I echoed incredulously. You inherited a thriving enterprise and drove it into the ground through arrogance and incompetence. That's not struggling, Daniel. That's failing. The market conditions affected everyone, including Ascendant. Yet we thrived while you floundered. Face it, Daniel. You were never qualified for the position. You just had the right last name and gender. His face contorted with rage. I won't let you take what's mine. It stopped being yours the moment you proved incapable of leading it, I replied calmly. 24 hours, Daniel. Tick-tock. After he stormed out, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. The tables had turned so completely, it was almost poetic. Exactly 23 hours later, my phone rang. It was my father. We accept your terms, he said, his voice hollow. All of them. I pressed. Yes, he confirmed reluctantly. Daniel will step down. You'll have full control. I'll have my legal team draft the paperwork, I replied professionally. We'll announce the transition next week. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of champagne and walked to the window. 5 years ago, I'd stood outside Montgomery Industries, vowing to never look back. Now I was about to walk back in, not as the unwanted daughter, but as the owner. The formal signing took place 3 days later. Daniel refused to attend, but my parents arrived with their team of lawyers. As pen met paper, transferring control of Montgomery Industries to me, my mother leaned close. It's still the family business, she whispered, a last attempt to invoke sentiment. I signed with a flourish and handed her back the pen. No, I corrected her. Now it's my business. The look on my father's face as the reality sank in was worth every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt I'd experienced building Ascendant. He had cast me out believing I would fail. Instead, I had risen so high that I now held his fate in my hands. As they left my office, defeated and diminished, I noticed my father's shoulders were slumped in exactly the way he'd always criticized mine for being. The symmetry was perfect, the bargain was complete, and the victory was sweeter than I'd ever imagined. My first day as CEO of Montgomery Industries felt surreal. 5 years after being thrown out, I walked through the same revolving doors, but this time, security guards nodded respectfully, executives straightened their postures, and whispers followed in my wake. The corner office that once belonged to my father, and then Daniel, had been hastily cleared of personal items. I ran my fingers along the mahogany desk where my dreams had once been crushed and felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just a cool detachment. This office represented the past. I had my eyes firmly on the future. The executive team is assembled in the boardroom, my new assistant informed me. Thank you, Emma. Let's not keep them waiting. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 faces watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Most were holdovers from my father's era, old men in expensive suits who had never questioned the Montgomery way of doing business. Good morning, I began, remaining standing at the head of the table. I won't waste time with pleasantries. This company is dying, and we have exactly 90 days to save it. I tapped my tablet, and projections appeared on the wall screen. These are the immediate changes we'll be implementing. First, we're abandoning the European merger. It's hemorrhaging money with no path to profitability. Harold Winters, my father's longtime CFO, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Ms. Montgomery, we've invested over $200 million in that merger. We can't just walk away. It's the sunk cost fallacy, Harold. Continuing to pour money into a failed strategy won't magically make it successful. We're cutting our losses. Before he could protest further, I continued. Second, we're restructuring the entire R&D department. Our product pipeline has stagnated, and our competitors, including Ascendant, have left us behind. Daniel had a 10-year vision for. Another executive began. Daniel's vision led to a 75% drop in stock value. I interrupted coldly. His vision is no longer relevant. Throughout the 2-hour meeting, I systematically dismantled every failed policy my brother had implemented. Some executives nodded in agreement. They'd seen the writing on the wall. Others looked shell-shocked, their comfortable world upended. Finally, I concluded, I'll need resignation letters from the following people by end of day. I read out 5 names, all Daniel's closest allies and enablers. Your severance packages will be generous, but your departure is non-negotiable. As the room emptied, Janet Chen, the head of product development, lingered behind. She had been at the company when I was still there, one of the few who had treated my ideas with respect. "Welcome back, Alex," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, many of us knew you were right. We just didn't have the courage to say it. And now," she smiled grimly, "now we're ready to follow someone who actually knows what they're doing." In the weeks that followed, I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on the office couch more often than in my own bed. I combed through every department, every contract, every product line. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Daniel's incompetence went deeper than anyone had admitted. He had ignored critical market trends, alienated key partners, and surrounded himself with yes-men who reinforced his worst impulses. Worst of all, he had fostered a toxic culture where innovation was stifled and dissent was punished. The employees, to my surprise, rallied around me. Many had suffered under Daniel's capricious leadership, their ideas dismissed, their warnings ignored. When I instituted an open-door policy and actually listened to their concerns, morale began to improve. 1 month into my tenure, I called an all-hands meeting in the company auditorium. Today marks a new chapter for Montgomery Industries. I announced to hundreds of attentive faces. We're launching Project Phoenix, a complete reimagining of our core products with cutting-edge AI integration. The crowd's energy was palpable as I outlined my vision, a vision Daniel had once dismissed as too speculative. I introduced new team leaders, restructured departments, and promised bonuses tied to innovation, not just sales targets. As I left the stage to thunderous applause, I caught sight of an unexpected figure at the back of the room. Daniel, unshaven and disheveled, watched with naked hatred in his eyes. He wasn't supposed to be in the building. Security must have recognized him and let him in out of misplaced respect. I nodded to my chief of security, who immediately moved to escort him out. The employees parted like a wave, some openly glaring at the man who had nearly destroyed their livelihoods. "This isn't over," Daniel hissed as security approached. "Father may have caved, but I haven't. This is still my company." "No, Daniel, it isn't," I replied calmly, loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "It belongs to the people who are saving it, the people you ignored and belittled. Now, please leave before you embarrass yourself further." His face contorted with rage, but security firmly guided him toward the exit. The last image I had of my brother was his back as he was escorted from the building he once commanded, shoulders hunched in defeat. That evening, my father called. "Was it necessary to humiliate him publicly?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "I didn't humiliate him, Father.
He did that to himself.
Just as you did by placing him in a position he was never qualified to hold. He's your brother, and I was your daughter. I cut in. Did that matter when you cast me aside?" Daniel made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences. The business press dubbed my corporate turnaround the Montgomery Miracle. Within 3 months, the stock had stabilized. Within 6, it had begun to climb. I integrated Montgomery's salvageable technologies with Ascendant's cutting-edge solutions, creating synergies that benefited both companies. A year after taking control, I stood on the same stage where I'd announced Project Phoenix, this time to celebrate our return to profitability. The company that had once rejected me now thrived under my leadership. The employees who had once avoided eye contact now looked to me with respect and even admiration. As I surveyed the room full of faces, some new, some familiar, I realized the true nature of my victory. I hadn't just taken back a company. I had transformed it into something better than it had ever been under my father or brother. The power shift was complete, and it was just the beginning. I'll create the final section based on your brief, my final victory, ensuring it concludes the story properly in approximately 900 words while staying true to the brief and keeping it engaging. 2 years into my reign at Montgomery Industries, the business media couldn't get enough of the turnaround story. The Wall Street Journal ran a cover feature titled The Prodigal Daughter: How Alexandra Montgomery Saved Her Family's Legacy. Forbes named me among their most powerful women in business. CNBC invited me for exclusive interviews about the Montgomery method of corporate revival. What none of them knew was that I was orchestrating my final act of reclamation. My parents had maintained their honorary titles as Chairman Emeritus and head of the Montgomery Foundation, respectively. They attended board meetings and charity galas, putting on brave faces as I systematically rebuilt the company they had nearly destroyed. They believed their positions were secure, a concession to family ties and tradition. They were wrong. I waited until our quarterly board meeting to spring my trap. The boardroom was packed with the new executives I'd brought in, along with a few remaining old-timers. My father sat in his customary place at the far end of the table, opposite me, a symbolic position of respect that carried no actual power. Before we discuss Q3 results, I began, I'd like to propose a restructuring of our corporate governance. I nodded to my CFO, who distributed sealed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find details of my proposal to buy out all remaining Montgomery family shares, consolidating ownership under Ascendant Technologies. My father's face drained of color as he scanned the document. This would remove the family entirely from ownership, he said, his voice barely controlled. Correct, I confirmed. The Montgomery name would remain on the building and products. It has brand value, after all, but ownership would transfer completely to Ascendant. You can't do this, he protested. The family shares are mostly owned by the family trust. I finished for him. A trust that, due to the terms of our original agreement, now falls under my control as CEO. The room fell silent. My father looked to his allies on the board, only to find uncertain faces. The company had prospered under my leadership. Stock options had made them wealthy. None were willing to rock the boat for a man whose decisions had nearly bankrupted them all. I'd like to call for a vote, I said calmly. All in favor? Hands rose around the table. First my appointees, then one by one, the old guard. Even Harold Winters, my father's golfing buddy for 30 years, raised his hand, avoiding my father's betrayed stare. Motion carries, I announced. The transfer will be executed by the end of the week. After the meeting, my father cornered me in my office, my mother at his side. For once, her perfect composure had cracked. Tears streaked her carefully applied makeup. Why? She demanded. Haven't you proven your point? You saved the company. You humiliated Daniel. Why take this final step? I regarded them coolly. Because you still don't understand. This was never about proving a point. It was about taking what should have been mine from the beginning. But we're your parents, my father said, as if that simple fact should change everything. You gave up that right when you cast me aside, I replied. You chose Daniel. You chose wrong. These are the consequences. My father's shoulders slumped in defeat. What happens to us now? You'll receive fair market value for your shares, approximately $30 million. Enough to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. The foundation will continue under new leadership. I paused. You should be grateful. It's more than you offered me when you showed me the door. After they left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, contemplating what I'd accomplished. The empire that had rejected me was now mine, completely, irrevocably mine. The family that had dismissed my potential now lived on my charity. Daniel fared worst of all. Without his family connections or the Montgomery name to trade on, he'd bounced between increasingly mediocre positions. His reputation as the man who nearly destroyed Montgomery Industries followed him everywhere. Last I heard, he was trying to launch a startup in Austin, desperately seeking investors who remembered the Montgomery name, but not its recent history. I received a handwritten note from him a week after the buyout was announced. Just 3 lines. You've taken everything. I hope it fills the emptiness inside you. Some victories cost more than they're worth. I burned it without replying. Daniel still didn't understand. This wasn't about filling an emptiness. It was about claiming what I deserved, what I had earned through my own merit rather than birthright. 6 months later, at the company's 75th anniversary gala, I stood on stage looking out at hundreds of employees, partners, and industry leaders. The Montgomery building was illuminated against the night sky, a beacon of innovation once more. Some of you remember when this company lost its way. I told the crowd. When tradition was valued over innovation, when connections mattered more than competence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Today, we honor our history by looking forward, not backward. The Montgomery name stands for excellence again, not because of family lineage, but because of the extraordinary people in this room. Applause thundered through the hall. As it faded, I raised my glass for a toast. To Montgomery Industries, reborn, renewed, and reclaimed. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around me, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment of solitude. The city spread out before me, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. I thought about the frightened, angry young woman who had walked away from this building 5 years ago, determined to prove her worth. She had done more than that. She had built an empire of her own, then used it to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The daughter they discarded had become the architect of their legacy. I didn't feel the vindictive triumph I had once imagined. Instead, I felt something quieter and more profound, the satisfaction of justice served, of merit rewarded, of a story rewritten on my own terms. The company was mine. The victory was complete, and I owed them nothing.